Hey guys, we are back for another round of playoffs because Miller lost last week. Does not mean the season is over. May feel like it to a lot of folks, but we've got another round of playoffs just starting. 5A, D1, D2, and not in our area, but a little south of us and north, 6A, D1 and D2 will begin the first round of the playoffs this week. So today we have Andrew McCulloch from the McAllen Monitor
Yes, sir. McCown Monitor.
and RGV Sports that's going to join us to give us the in-depth breakdown of these teams coming up from the Valley to play the Coastal Bend teams. Also, we've got the Caller Times Quinton Martinez, stat guy as we like to call him. He man, if you guys aren't following Quinton on Twitter or any social media, he's updating stats, like almost official stats as they come across as they're happening in the game. So Quinton's a great resource. It's a great follow on Twitter. Same with Andy. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen Andy's work, probably from last week. Uh, um, Viral sensation last week. Isn't that right, Andy?
Yeah, it was kind of a strange week. I'm not going to lie to you. I think everyone knows what happened Thursday night, but the fallout from that was kind of something I don't think any of us really quite anticipated, or at least the magnitude of it, anyways.
Yeah. So Andy's Twitter famous now. And you know that typical celebrity style. You know, you come up getting praised, and then you start getting slammed, and there comes the bottom end of the roller coaster. So I think Andy saw that in the span of 12 hours. I think that's all we're going to say about that. But guys, a lot of football going on this weekend, correct?
Yes, sir. Excited for it. We're going to talk about 5A-D1 here, but we got a lot of Valley teams in action this week. We have 16 5A and 6A teams in 12 different games. Yesterday, I got done breaking down all of our 6A versus 6A matchups, but I'm excited to take a look at 5A-D1 with you guys here today.
Quinton, you guys have been following the show and following our social media. We haven't really done very many CCISD games outside of Miller, and it's not for lack of trying. I hate to say it this way, but it's been a very down year for the Coastal Bend schools outside of about three.
It's not an stretch. It's not exaggeration.
Yeah.
I mean, and we go through it the same at the Caller Times when we're making our decisions of which games to cover every week. We kind of knew coming into the season that there were going to be a lot more interesting, intriguing, competitive games in the 4A districts and below. In terms of the 5A district, we knew it was going to be Veterans Memorial versus Flower Bluff, definitely a circle your calendar kind of game. And also when both of those schools played Victoria West, we thought those were going to be pretty challenging, interesting games to follow. But outside of that, there hasn't been too many competitive games. I covered Moody versus Gregory Portland early in the season. It was a tight game, and we thought both of those schools were maybe going to challenge for that fourth playoff spot, but it kind of just fell out from underneath them. Moody had injuries. GP never got any traction this year. So it came down to Vets, Flower Bluff, and the two Victoria schools. And outside of that, there really weren't very many competitive games in the 5A Division I. And that was kind of to be expected coming in. And a lot of the eyes and the focus was going to be on that 4A district with Miller, Cal Allen, Port Lavaca, even Alice, TM, Beeville. Good schools, challenge teams that can play some football.
Bud, look like you're ready to say something.
It was just underwhelming for me in the 5A. I was surprisingly, I guess, impressed with Vets as the years progressed. You know me, I've never been the biggest Vets fan, so anytime I've had a chance to dog them, I have on the past years. But seriously, I think the Region 4 champs already. Obviously you have to play the 4 games to get there and whatnot, but I really just don't look at the competition in that region see much to challenge them, and even at that, I think they have a shot at Region 3. Cedar Park and Manville and maybe Richmond Foster will be the 3 heavyweights that are going to fight for that Region 3. To me, Carter Centerfit is the greatest equalizer on the field. The fact that he's got an amazing arm and he's really athletic. You saw what Miller did with Body in that region, using him like they did. So I think you're going to see some similarity with that in Vets, and he's experienced quarterback. So disappointing for me in the 5A area, I guess. For us down here, it was kind of a letdown. But Vets was a nice, pleasant surprise. Honestly, they look really good.
Yeah, so Vets, I guess we'll start with them. So they're 9-0, 8-0 in district. They're scoring 50 points a game, averaging 50 points a game, and they're only giving up 15. The big man, just like you said, Justin, is Captain America over there, Carter Centerfit.
Coined it.
Yeah, he coined it, heard it here first. Uh, he's thrown for almost 1,700 yards, 17 touchdowns, run for another 600, and ran for about 15.
He only
Um,
played the first quarter last
yeah,
week.
he they're not vets if you're a stat guy and you don't know anything about Veterans Memorial and you're following them just based off stats, they're not going to wow you because the starters have been out by halftime. Carter Centerfit, just like you said, played I think 3 series last week against Ray. So the stats for the whole team aren't very eye popping. Um, what worries me about that, and we've talked about it. We talked about it earlier in the season. Is the conditioning, playing the whole 4 quarters with the starters? Is that going to come back and get them later as they start facing some of this different competition from up north? Quinton, what are your thoughts?
You know, the number one, when you talk about Veterans Memorial, like I think we're all just anticipating to see what it's going to like when they take the reins off. They, like you said, they kind of go through the motions. They get up 3-4 scores in the first half, do their thing, and then it's just kind of vanilla after that. So when they play 4 full quarters, when they're all their guys are going, when they're really actually trying to show something and do some stuff creative on offense, how good are they going to be? That's still to be determined. But more than their conditioning, the thing that I wonder is going to get them is they played 9 games and pretty much 8 of them weren't even contests. Miller slapped them in the face the first game of the season. They were up a couple scores early on, but as it wore on, you kind of saw Veterans Memorial what they had, and they were going to come back and beat Miller, and that's what ended up happening. It was a 22-point game, even though they trailed big early on. But other than the Flower Bluff game, they really haven't played too many competitive games. They haven't been tested. The lack of a challenger to me is more of a concern if you're Veterans Memorial. Like you said, I really see them, just letting Carter Centerfit do whatever Carter Centerfit can do. If he's going to run for 200 and throw for 200, he's capable, and they will just let him go and have at it, much like Justin Evans did with Andrew Body this year. So I don't know if we've really seen what Vets is capable of. I think they've done enough to probably, deservedly so, be the favorite in the region. But, when they actually have to play games in the fourth quarter where plays are going to have to be made, how are they going to respond?
Yeah, or and I think we saw. Well, we kind of hit it on the head this year. They were down to Miller a couple points earlier in the season, but they haven't faced any adversity as a team yet. Last year they faced a ton of it, and it paid dividends in the playoffs. They lost Carter Centerfit early in the season last year. Missed 3 games last year, hopped back in time for the Miller game. And they had to figure out how to win with a backup quarterback who kind of was a backup, but not really. He was penciled in as a starter the year before. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting. Andrew.
Hang
Go
on.
ahead.
I think the side note on that is but Flower Bluff is honestly a really good team. They're very well coached. They're super balanced on both sides of the ball every year. And the Victoria West team was really good this year. And if you look at both those games, not taking nothing away from those teams, but Vets handled that with ease. I mean, they really did. The Bluff game was not like the Bluff games in the last 3 years. I mean, that was Vets game. And, years past, it went back and forth. And this year, to me, Vets handled that with ease. So I do think when they're ready to unleash them, I think they got a good chance to shock people. Obviously, you have to play the games, but I do think they're going to be a little slept on once you get later on in the playoffs by certain teams, just because of these reasons right here. They haven't played no one.
I don't know, but are they really slept on if they're penciled in as the favorites for the region?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone's letting them pass the region. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Once they get past Region 4, I don't think no one's got them penciled in any further than that. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. Andrew, what can you tell us about Brownsville? Or I'm sorry, Nicky Rowe.
So this is an interesting segue, I think, because you guys were talking about how Corpus Christi Vets maybe hasn't faced enough adversity yet this season, but they'll be playing one of the most resilient teams in the Rio Grande Valley in the Nicky Rowe Warriors. The Warriors are one of 3 teams in the 16 5A-D1 district that not only made the 6A playoffs last year, but won a game on the road in the 6A playoffs last year. They went and beat one of the most talented backs in South Texas in Brian Benavidez over there at Laredo United South last year. Actually, I'm sorry, that was Memorial. Roe beat Alexander on the road. Still an impressive win before they fell to Westco East. These guys have had a lot of injury concerns, both this season and last year. It's a very deep offense, but it's been rare that Roe has had everyone healthy and on the field at the same time. If that makes sense. They have a really talented backfield between the three-headed monster of Nick Meehan, Lorenzo Lopez, and Joey Partita. Partita hasn't played yet this year due to injury, but they also have maybe the best tight end in the Valley this year in Gustavo Cruz. He came up big for them in several games this year. And then I think David Savage, their wide receiver, who had a collarbone injury actually to start this season, I think he's the most overlooked wideout in the Valley, mostly just because he's had trouble staying on the field. But when he's out there, he's a real game changer. I think the book on this Row team, based on the season so far, is if they're going to win a game, it's usually going to be in a shootout. They've lost 3 times this year, I believe, twice to the Sherryland schools, a really good Pioneer team with Eddie Lee Marburger, a UTSA commit at quarterback over there. And then they lost in a shootout to a Sherryland high school who might be the best Valley team not in the playoffs this year. But Roe in their district zone, well, 16 5A D1 was kind of a tale of 2 zones, if we're being honest. It's a 10-team district. In the West Zone, we had the 3 McAllen schools, Memorial Row, Mackay, and then Donna and La Jolla Palmview. Now, on the other side, we had Westco East and the 4 5A Brownsvilles. And I really thought the competition in that West Zone with the McAllen schools has really sort of prepared Roe for this moment. They shut out a good Donna team with a good defense. They blew the doors off Palmview. They beat Mackay by a touchdown with the defensive stand at the end, and they lost to McAllen Memorial essentially with the drop touchdown pass with less than a minute to go. So, I mean, these guys are maybe 1 or 2 plays away from playing for a district title last week, and it sounds like they certainly have an uphill matchup in this one, but I think it's a scary matchup if you're Corpus Christi Vets, at least for the first round. This is probably, in terms of the 2 opponents, a matchup you would expect to see maybe in round 2.
That's a good test for Vets. You'll see what they're about. Right?
You know, looking at their numbers, you know, they did play an abbreviated season as well because of COVID, right, Andy? So
Right.
their overall record, they were 4-3, 2-1, so they played 7 games. But looking at their stats, just like you said, James Gomez, who's a quarterback there, I mean, 750 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 208 on the ground, and another touchdown. And kind of like you said, they've got a couple running backs there, Meehan and Lopez, who have done some damage there. And you, on paper right now, based on what Vets has and what their starters have done, it's almost equal, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Savage kid is the one that impressed me looking over everything. You know, he's just like you said, he didn't play very many games. I think he may have played in 1, but he caught the ball 3 times for 182 yards. So that boosts up the yards per catch. But those 3 guys that you mentioned, they got 10 touchdowns in between them: Gus Cruz, Diego Pacheco, and Jorge Diaz. So it should be a very interesting first round matchup Friday night here in Corpus. Looking at it from the outside, not knowing anything about Roe, I mean, I thought this was really easily going to be a sleeper, and we were even debating if we were going to go to the game or not. But just like you said, looking into everything, it does look like it could be a pretty interesting matchup, at least for a little while. Quinton, what do you think?
This will be a good test for Vets too, it sounds like, because I mean, it sounds like they're a team that hasn't been pushed a whole lot in regulation this year. And I would say the offense is definitely the strength of this Row team, although they do have a pretty good secondary too. So I think if they can generate enough turnovers and, you know what I mean, score when they touch the ball to keep pace, I'm not saying they could pull off the upset on the road, but I think they could keep this one closer than a lot of people maybe realize.
I think just in general, the strength of schedule in 15 5A is weak. You know, they played a lot of games that were not competitive, and I think that's going to be a huge test this bi-district week. You're really going to see a difference in the teams that were more battle tested, you know, coming up from 16 5A. So, you know, I think, like I said, I think there's going to be a lot more close games at halftime than people realize because of the fact that, you know, they played tougher games week in and week out than what Flower Bluff or Veterans Memorial or even Victoria West did.
Yeah, definitely.
I think to your point there, Quinton, I think Pace and Westlaco East are probably roughly in that same boat just because of the half of the zone they played in. I mean, to be fair to Westco East, I mean, they ran over most of their opponents with the exception of pace. I think that was a 2-touchdown game, kind of a shootout. But other than that, Westco East didn't give up a touchdown to anybody they played. Winning games 56-0, 49-7, that sort of thing. I mean, they're a team that went to the third round of the 6A-D2 playoffs last year, and they only got knocked out by Austin Westlake, who won the whole thing, which is not a bad way to go out if you're Westco East. It's also worth mentioning that Westco East beat Rowe in the 6A-D2 playoffs in McAllen last year. So it's unfortunate that Westco East and McAllen Memorial weren't able to play their district championship game this past Friday. I'm told it was canceled not due to any positive COVID test, but more as a precautionary type of measure. As it was kind of explained to me, it was two teams essentially saying, we both think we're going to win first round playoff games, so we don't want to jeopardize playing our first round playoff games, if that makes sense, just in this whole pandemic era we're sort of living through right now.
Well, we're talking a bit on Wesco East. Let's go ahead and jump into that game. It's our fourth seed. It's Victoria East facing the number one seed from that district. So Victoria East is coming in, scoring 30 points a game and giving up 28. It goes back to just what Quinton said and what we've kind of hit on earlier. It comes down to kind of a mediocre 15-5A for us on our end. But they do have some playmakers. They're a run-based offense. Their quarterbacks, they've got two, Jaden Williams and Latavian Johnson, who have run for over 500 yards both, thrown for just shy of 200 each one. They've got a running back, Alan Jimenez, who's run for over 1,000 yards and 18 touchdowns. It's going to be an interesting matchup. I know a lot of these bigger schools down in the valley, they like to open it up. You don't see a whole lot of slot T teams or wing T teams above the 4A level up there. So it's going to be interesting to see how this Westlaco team kind of responds to one of these run-based offenses. It's especially if you don't see it in district play, you're not getting ready for it. Something you don't see every week. It's going to be interesting. What's your take on that? On their defense coming up a run-based offense.
Definitely. I think there's for sure something to that. I think Westco East, ironically, is maybe one of the exceptions to that rule, a team that has a really big offensive line that likes to run the ball a lot. But to your point, everyone they played this year did not operate that way. Yeah. So this will be something new for them this year. The one thing I will say is the senior quarterback, Avery Bowen at Westco East this year, he was at Donna High last season. And so I think he gives them a vertical element to their offense that maybe they didn't have before, and a little bit more balance. And that defense has really always been there. I think even in a kind of a blowout game, to be honest, against Westlake in the playoffs last year, I think they held Westlake to either their lowest or second lowest point total of the playoffs. Some of that you might attribute to backups coming into the game and stuff. But this is one of the tougher defensive teams to move the ball against in the Valley, and that's really what they pride themselves on. But to your point, we haven't really seen them play in any close games so far this year. So I think if Victoria East can find a way to keep this competitive into the second half, then it ought to be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Quinn, what you can give us? Can you give us a little more on East?
It's interesting. I think it seems like in the games that have mattered, Jaden Williams is the sophomore, Latavian Johnson is the senior. He's a guy that's played for a couple of years. In the games that mattered this year, you saw a little bit more of Latavian Johnson than you saw of Jaden in the backfield. But when it comes back to it, Alan Jimenez is the 1,000-yard back. He had 300 yards of that in one game. He's kind of slippery enough to just kind of get out and make some big plays when they need to. But the thing that concerns me about Victoria East is, yeah, they had Flower Bluff down a couple touchdowns at halftime early in the season, but they also, kind of played competitively, maybe longer than you would have liked against a team like Moody, against a team like Gregory Portland. That game came down to the very wire. And those are teams that only won 2 or 3 games. So, there's something to be said that can be good about playing to the level of your opponent, but also, if you play down to the level of your opponent, that's not a good characteristic. And I kind of think East is kind of that way. I could see them, making it last, a quarter and a half before things probably turn out of their favor. But, I don't know that they've shown me enough. I think the 3 teams that have the best chance to win this week are obviously the top three seeds. And it's tough for them, especially to go up against that East defense that really hasn't given up much of anything. And then also, just based on the type of offense that they run, if you get them behind early, they're not exactly equipped to overcome a 14 or 21 point deficit. So that could be a huge blow if West Coast East can build up a little bit of a lead in the second or third quarter, because they're not really that capable of turning it on like some other teams can. Just turn to their spread and take their chances.
Yeah, and in 9 games, their leading receivers got 268 yards and no touchdowns. And their second leading receiver is about 218 with 1 touchdown. I think the quarterbacks have thrown for a total of 3 touchdowns there. So just like we've seen with a typical run-based team, that when they get down a couple points, with the exception of Port Lavaca, if they get down, they don't have that quick strike ability, and that's usually the end of the ball game. One of the things, Andy, to kind of piggyback what you said about East, they've given up 37 points in 4 games, and that's another abbreviated schedule thing because of COVID down there. They've only played 4 games. They're 4-0, giving up 37 points in 4 games, and they're averaging scoring 48. Just like you said, they can put the points up. And to piggyback what you said about the running or the quarterback Avery Brown, in a full season, they potentially could have had 2,000-yard runners in Brown and the running back Gio Guerra. They both ran for 600 and 700 yards so far this season. So it would have been interesting to see that season play out for those two and see how they ended up out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great stat because I think it illuminates just how good that offensive line is in West Coast East too. That's a school for a 5A school that has a tremendous amount of size. They're one of the few Valley teams that I feel like once you get to that second, third, fourth round of the playoff stage, I feel like they're one of the few teams down here who size-wise match up with those 5A and 6A schools upstate pretty well.
Yeah. Quinton, anything else to add on Victoria East?
Again, I think I could see them being a little fiery and get excited early on, and they'll hang for a little bit. But I just think over the course of the night, it's going to be hard for them, and I think they're going to get they're going to fall behind, and it's going to be difficult for them to catch back up. In terms of the games, this is the one that I feel probably the strongest about. In terms of the West Coast East is probably the heavy favorite in this one. The other games, obviously we talked about Veterans Memorial and what they've done this year, but there's some things that are a little bit challenging about what Roe's going to do. And the other thing about that game that I didn't mention earlier is I don't think Roe's played in about 3 weeks. If that, how that will affect them. In a truncated season as it is, everybody's weird, and maybe you're healthier when you haven't played as many games, but also you lose that game speed, that type of stuff. If you let 1 or 2 guys get behind you early, 14-0 in the first couple of minutes because you're trying to get back into speed could be tough.
I was looking at Max Preps earlier, and man, I want to say it. What they've got, I think I was looking at Roe's schedule, and they had them losing to East this year. I'm like, they haven't even played Victoria East. What is this all about? So just be careful if you guys are looking up stats and stuff, what you can trust. But since we're on Victoria, let's go ahead and talk about West. So Victoria West is coming in, and they're going to be facing the second seed up there, correct? That's McAllen Memorial.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So correct me. Did Memorial get a new head coach this year?
No, they Coach Littleton. He's been there, I want to say, as long as just about any head coach in the Valley. He's been here since before the year 2000.
See, that's what I thought. And again, Max Prep strikes again. They had a different head coach there. I was like, what is this? This isn't right. So I had to ask.
Yeah, no, it's a good segue because I think Coach Littleton is he's one of those Valley coaches that I think has a reputation that well exceeds the Valley, just based on his track record and the teams Memorial has every year.
He's put out a ton of running backs, Division I running backs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the story of this team, right? Because the last 8 years they've had either Campbell Spades, who's a freshman at Navy right now, or his older brother Trevor, who's a grad transfer at Notre Dame, which is a pretty good luxury to have for 8 seasons. Although the Mustangs
a grad transfer from Stanford to Notre Dame, right? Yes. So, yeah.
Thank you for clarification. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of been the story of this Memorial team, to tell you the truth, is what is kind of going to be the answer for that. And it's kind of been a running back by committee approach. The 2 guys who have stood out, I think, the most have been senior Michael Lewis, who's kind of their fullback last season, and senior Andrew Lewis, who kind of filled in for Spates at times last year also. But they have two really good sophomore backs too, in Max Garcia and Max Alanis, or Ethan Garcia and Max Alanis. Sorry about that. This is a Memorial team that loves to run the ball. Coach Littleton likes to joke they practice passing the ball, but they don't do it very much. They're a team that I think could find themselves in some trouble if they fall behind. But the flip side of that coin is if you fall behind against this Memorial team, good luck catching back up, because Coach Littleton is really an expert at milking the clock and, really putting you in a difficult spot late in the game.
So this looks just like the opposite of the game we just talked about, right? Because so McAllen's coming in, they're 5-1, 4-0 in district. They're scoring 28 points a game and giving up 24. However, again, ground-based attack, and you're coming up against a Victoria West team who likes to throw the ball around, right? So they've got a quarterback Blake Buzzell, who's thrown for 2,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, and run for another 200 and another 6. So, and they've got a running back, Chase Patek, or Patek, is that how it's pronounced? Quinton Patek?
I'm not 100% certain, but yeah, Chase Patek. I got a chance to see them last week against Flower Bluff, that anticipated game that was with second place on the line, and obviously a home game in the first round of the playoffs. It kind of broke bad for them early on. It was kind of one of those tuck rule kind of incomplete passes that the Buzzell threw. They ended up calling it, instead of an incomplete pass, they called it a fumble. Flower Bluff jumped on it, and they were down 2 scores really quickly. The game, they're able to score, but it's still that kind of the game schedule didn't work out in their favor. They want to get up on you. They want to keep their foot on the gas and keep throttling. They're an explosive offense, and they like to go tempo. Buzzell, especially their quarterback, especially in the red zone, he's more of a running threat. He's a guy that if you sit there and you start covering everybody, he's just going to say, okay, I'm going to take my 15-yard touchdown. Patek is good in the running game. He's also good in terms of just little drop-off passes that he can take for yardage. Their offense impressed me. I kind of saw the numbers and I wasn't sure. Hey, let's see them play a good defense. And Flower Bluff has been known for their defense for quite a long time. So I wanted to see what they were able to do. They were able to move the ball, and kind of the same situation against Vets a couple weeks ago. They fell behind 40-6, I think, in the first half, and everything went against them. And they still kind of just went out there and kept moving the ball and ended up scoring 26, 27 points against Veterans Memorial. They're going to be able to score. They're going to try to use their pace against you. They're a sneaky good team. I know they had a good record and they lost the last 2 games of the regular season after winning 6 in a row, but that offense kind of gives them a puncher's shot against anybody. They're very confident in offense. They have playmakers, and I think that if they got a break or two, I definitely think that they're capable of going down and winning a road game.
People down here.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
Oh, it's all good. People down here are a little bit familiar with that Victoria West team too. If you guys remember, all the way back to week 1, they played Raymondville, a 4A school down here in Falfurrias. I think Raymondville got a win within the last minute of that game because of a superb athlete they have, and Zarabian Armendariz. He had, I think, 365 yards and 6 touchdowns in that game. But to your point, Quinton, I think people down here are familiar with how explosive this Victoria West offense can be. And I think, to your point, it's going to be incumbent upon the Memorial defense if they're going to win this game. And I think this might be the closest matchup of any of the 4 we're going to talk about today, kind of for that reason, just because I think if Victoria West can get it going early offensively and kind of climb out to a multi-possession lead, I think it'll be hard for Memorial to climb back, just given the amount of play clock usually they need to complete a scoring drive. So I think defensively, the 2 guys to watch in this one for the Mustangs are going to be junior defensive tackle Marcus De Ochoa. He's been a really big disruptor on the interior of that defensive line all season. He's a guy who came up and started last year as one of the few underclassmen on a really good squad last year. And then you have senior linebacker Christian Sanchez, who led this team in tackles for loss and sacks last season. I think both of those guys are going to have kind of disruptive games and really get into the backfield and in the quarterback space a little bit to sort of keep Memorial in this game and let their offense do their thing.
Well, I was about to hit on that. I think this team probably has, 13 sacks as a team, and the De Ochoa kid's got 8 by himself, and the Sanchez kid has got 2. Right. So, I mean, they definitely get pressure on quarterbacks. So that's going to be a very interesting matchup. I don't think we've got a team in our area that's got 8 sacks as a team, Quinton.
Veterans Memorial has been okay getting to the quarterback as well. It's funny. Everybody talks about Carter Centerfit and what their offense is able to do, but defensively, they kind of get lost in the shuffle. Jabez Hudson, their stellar safety, he's among the league leaders, the area leaders in interceptions. And when they do turn the ball over, they've been able to score on defense. Veterans Memorial, so they do get to they get into the backfield a little bit. So I would say that they're one of the few that in our area that can sack the quarterback. The thing that's interesting, in watching West last week, I think there were times where Flower Bluff went on a 12-play drive that, for 70 yards, go score a touchdown, and Flower Bluff's feeling good about themselves, and then West goes 85 yards the other way in 3 plays in 92 seconds. So it's that type of offense, and you sleep just for a minute, and before you know it, they ran 4 plays, and it's only been 47 seconds off the game clock. And even when Flower Bluff opened it up late, to a 2 or 3 score advantage, West went down and scored once, and then Flower Bluff scored again, and then West went down and looking like they were going to score one more time and kind of make it hairy in the last couple minutes of the game. There was a pick 6 for Flower Bluff that pretty much put the fork in it, but they score fast. They don't use a lot of game clock, so you never really feel, even if they're behind, that they're going to necessarily be out of it until the clock shows 0. So their offense is just scary enough for pretty much anybody that they play, that they're going to be able to pick up points quickly if they can get a defensive stop.
Yeah, they spread the ball around very well, just like we were talking earlier. Patek's got 951 yards on the ground, almost 1,000 yards, and in the air they're spreading it around. I think 4 receivers or 3 receivers got over 400 yards receiving. DeAndre Fillmore, who I think is a sophomore, it leads the team with 609 yards and 9 touchdowns. And then you got Latrell Barfield, 500 yards, and Dion Green with another 450. They do definitely light it up, but at the same time, you've got that yin and the yang, right? So you've got that ball control offense coming from McAllen. So that should be a very good one as well. And that's going to be down in McAllen, correct?
Sure. That's a 7 p.m. kickoff, I believe, at McAllen Veterans Memorial Stadium.
So that should be a good one, folks. Whether it's streamed or not, anybody locally, I know Rio was working on some games to get some broadcasting rights. I know they got the Harlingen one, but I'm not sure if they're going to be able to get any other ones. So just be on the lookout. If not, it's probably going to be on Texan Live. Being that we've talked about Flower Bluff so much, let's go ahead and talk about them. And that's our last game on the slate for this week. It's Flower Bluff facing Brownsville Pace this week. We've kind of hit a lot on the Bluff. Justin started it, and Quinton, you kind of took the baton from him and gave a little more information on them. They're coming in scoring 40 points a game and giving up 16. Their only loss this season was to Veterans Memorial. This is they've got a new quarterback for the 3rd year in a row. Braden Sharon was a quarterback 2 years ago for the last couple of years, and then last year was Drew Schmidt coming in as a senior for a year, and this year they've got junior Nash Villegas coming in, and you can't tell it's his first year starting. He's thrown for 2,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, ran for another 4. The big surprise to me, Quinton, I think it may be the injury, is Isaac Miles's numbers. It's the first time in his 3-year starting career. I think he started as a freshman, but I couldn't find any freshman numbers for him, where he hasn't run for 1,000 yards. He ran for 700 this year and 9 touchdowns. Last year he ran for 1,600. The year before he ran for 1,800. Slowed down a little bit there. Matt Martinez has kind of stepped in there and rushed for another 300. But the big story on this offense outside of Nash has been Raiden Campbell, who's been kind of everywhere. Quinton, you're on mute. Who's got 30 receptions, 600 yards in the air. He's run a few times, run for 200 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's got a few interceptions. I think he leads the team with 4 or 3, 50 tackles. The guy's everywhere, right? So outside of Nash, I think Raiden's been the big story this year.
I think one of the things that Nash, if anybody that's seen Flower Bluff this year, Nash Villegas, big 6'4", 6'5" kid, has just a cannon for an arm. He can sit there and just drop 45-yard pass in right in the breadbasket, just seemingly effortlessly. And you talked about it. He plays beyond his years. Yes, he's a junior, and this is his first year starting, but you can't tell by watching him. He doesn't make those type of mistakes. I think one of the things that's kind of hampered Flower Bluff in the past is, you've had some quarterbacks that have played a little more risky. They've turned the ball over when Flower Bluff, has a good defense, is good with its running game, and they didn't need somebody to be that guy that's going to have to make or break you. So, I think Nash Villegas kind of brings a little bit of calm to the position. He's very poised. You get that when you talk to him. And they've opened it up with him, letting him run a little bit more as district has gone on. And just that, that deceptive factor, if he gets 5 carries for 25 yards, sometimes that's enough to pick up a 4th and 1, especially with a big kid like that. Isaac Miles has been hampered. He's been their stellar running back. He's a 3-year starter since he was a sophomore. I've seen him in a couple games. He's been a little bit banged up, and there's other games that he didn't play this year. And as a whole, they play a lot of games where they get out ahead early, and some of their stats are metered a little bit because of the fact that they only play 2 quarters, and they don't really they're more than ready to put another running back in there or different wide receivers in there, so that they're giving their guys rest or letting Raiden play mostly on defense. But that addition of Raiden Campbell to the offense, that's something they talked about a little bit in the off season. They said they went and they visited Denton Ryan this year, talked to the coaching staff, and that's a team that's competing for state championships every year. And even though they're a 5A school, they play guys on both sides of the ball. So they kind of picked their brain out how they can do that successfully. They knew he was enough of a talent that, if we can get him and get some positive things out of him. And you saw it last week. Last week was a perfect example. He 6 tackles on defense, a guy that's a quarterback, back there in the secondary, but he also had 100 yards rushing and 100 yards receiving. Anytime they get the ball to him, there's a good chance he can make a big play. So I was impressed with this Flower Bluff offense more than I thought it was going to be, especially with a new quarterback. They're more vertical than they have been in years past, just because of his arm strength. But they have the beef and the size up front. Johnny Dixon is soon to be a 4 or 5-star offensive line prospect. He's getting, he has offers from all over the place, and he plays on left tackle for them. So I think they used him well last week. And they have a lot of pieces, and they're a good offense. That's been really good running the ball the last couple of years, but has really added to their passing attack this season.
So Pace, we kind of talked about Pace before we started the show. We saw Pace last year, and the name we heard a lot was Jose Bonda, who's I think he's an RGV baseball commit, right? Didn't he commit to them last year? So he's baseball is his first, and you see that a lot with the Coastal Bend kids as well. A lot of these kids that play in these programs are primary baseball players, and they've committed to D1 baseball programs somewhere else. But he's kind of leading. He's back again, right? And if you saw that playoff game, which was televised last year, I think it was, he kind of ran all over Miller. Very big kid back there. There's essentially a fullback playing quarterback, a la Tim Tebow. He's thrown for 658 yards, 7 touchdowns, a run for another 300, and another 4. They were a very run-based offense last year. I'm guessing more of the same this year, Andrew?
A little bit. I think Pace is maybe a little bit more balanced than they were last year, and I think you can attribute a lot of that to Jose Bonda. That was a perfect segue, by the way, because that's immediately where I wanted to go with this. In the games when Pace has been most successful, when they hung with Westco East, and this past week when they had a really nice win over Mac High, who's an underrated team in this area, I think. He really shined both as a pocket passer and a guy on the move. As you touched on, he's a D1 baseball guy. He signed to go play middle infield with UTRGV, so the speed is a factor there. I really think if Pace is going to stay in this game, because I was fortunate enough to see Flower Bluff play, I want to say it was maybe their season opener last year, against a good 6A PSG High.
Yep.
They looked really sharp in that game, and it was that defense, I think, that showed in that one. But to your point, both with that last playoff game and that game against PSG High last year, it seems like mobile quarterbacks are sort of having a leg up on this Flower Bluff defense, so to speak. It's a really well-rounded unit, and I think Flower Bluff should still probably be the favorite in this game. Although I think if Pace is going to make it a game, it's going to be because of Bonda's work through both his legs and his arm.
Quinn?
I think, I saw Bonda really, make Miller's life a little miserable last year. And I think people can't account for him. He's strong. He's quicker than you realize. When he's coming out of the backfield. Um, you know, I think I think it'll be really interesting to see how they respond. They didn't wilt under pressure at all last year against Miller, and Miller was the number one scoring team in the state in the classification. They were playing at home. All those things that go against them. But I think at the end of the day, Flower Bluff has enough playoff experience, even with a new quarterback this year. They got 3-year starters. They're a team that's used to not only being in the playoffs but going 2 or 3 rounds deep. They thought, I think when the UL realignment came out in February, they thought that this was a winnable region for a Corpus Christi school this year, and that's kind of been their benchmark for a long, long time at Flower Bluff. Was, hey, we want to win Region 4. That's the one thing. They've been to the regional finals in the past. They've kind of established themselves over the last 10 or 15 years as probably the second best long-term program behind Cal Allen in Corpus Christi, at least at the moment. And they've kind of seen this as a year, at least this realignment, these 2 years, as a good chance for a Corpus Christi school to win a regional title. So, I think that that experience of playing in the playoffs and the care that they've been talking about for a long time, I kind of expect Flower Bluff to come out there and be focused. But when you have a quarterback like that, as we've seen with Carter Centerfit or Andrew Body, that's always a wild card. And if he does well early on, and you get that confidence, you just never know what kind of game you're going to be in for.
No doubt. And one important note to add on that Pace Flower Bluff game is Brownsville Pace was actually the only Valley school out of the 4 we've talked about here that played a game last week. That was because Brownsville Porter had to forfeit, unfortunately, their zone play-in against Rowe, which gave the Warriors the 4 seed. And then, of course, as we discussed earlier, Wesco East and McCulloch Memorial didn't end up playing for that district title. So I believe Pace is really the only team who's had consistent game action for these past 2 or 3 weeks. So that might be something to keep an eye on just in terms of the overall performances in all 4 of these games.
I think these weekends games should be, pretty competitive. Originally when the slate came out and not really thinking about just looking at the teams, I thought this was a heavily favored Coastal Bend week, but that's, digging into everything and reading everything. I think these, just like Quinton said earlier, I think these games are going to be a lot closer at the half than a lot of folks think they're going to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also there are so many interesting stylistic matchups this week too, right? Like we talked about that Memorial Victoria West game and then Victoria East and Westco East also. I think given all the different variables in play, this should be a pretty interesting weekend, especially with not all of these teams coming off of game weeks this past week. It ought to be interesting to see who really comes prepared for these bi-district games.
Yeah, definitely.
I think when you go back to realignment, the power dynamic, and especially in this region, is obviously tilted toward Corpus and the Valley. I mean, 15 and 16, any of those schools would be favored over the 2 San Antonio districts, and that's no slight on the San Antonio districts, but just what we've seen typically. I think the only school in 13 or 14 that is even capable of playing competitively would be Southside, maybe. And that's because they were in a pretty salty district the last couple of years, with Cal Allen and Port Lavaca, and they made the playoffs out of those districts with Alice as well. So, you don't really see a lot of teams challenging from the San Antonio districts, other than maybe possibly a Southside. So, this week is interesting because it'll say a lot, because if either district can come away 3-1, then I think those schools would have to feel really good that they're going to be out there in the regional semifinals or in the regional final, maybe possibly playing against each other. If I had to lean anyway, as vanilla as this sounds, I'd like the home teams in all 4 games. I think West will be close, but I'm not sure if they have just enough to get there. But if I had to guess, I'd say the 4 home teams win this week.
Sorry.
No,
I'm
go
with
ahead,
Quinton in that I think probably all 4 of the home teams this week should be favored. I think probably the closest one of the 4, if you made me say one, would be Victoria West and McCulloch Memorial, just because of the stylistic differences there. But I think Quinton also made a really good point to say that I think it's not out of the realm of possibility to suggest that we see potentially a Coastal Bend versus RGV matchup in the regional final for this bracket too. I mean, I know Wesco East and Corpus Christi Vets both have internal plans of playing that far. And I know there are some other teams in this group that we talked about also that'll be in that mix too.
Yeah, and I think Quentin, I think you hit it on the head as far as the wild card in this region. I think it's Southside, because of what they bring. I think they've got the biggest arm in San Antonio, and their quarterback, Richie Torres. He's 6'6" or 6'7", big kid, and he can probably throw the ball 100 yards. Exaggeration there, obviously, but he's got the Camarillo brothers, or at least there's one that's left. Very, very quick out of the backfield. And they kind of move him everywhere. Micah Young, number 8, the linebacker, who's I think just committed to the University of Wyoming. And the flip side of that is they only carry about 31, 32 kids on the roster, just like we'd seen in the past, Quentin, the last couple of years. They were playing 5A football with 3A numbers, and they're still doing it. Ricky Locke's turning that program around, but it's slow to get those athletes to come out and actually play football. But he's doing a heck of a job with the kids that he's got out there. So I think Matt Stepp said something about it earlier today also, is that probably is the sleeper here in Region 4 is Southside. And I think it's just because folks overlook them. I think this year they won the district title for the 3rd time in school history, and I think only the 3rd or 4th Southside San Antonio school to go undefeated. So not a whole lot of history there on the south side of San Antonio as far as football goes. But they're fun to watch, man. They're very fun to watch, and they're putting up a lot of points. Guys, you guys got anything else you want to add before we go? Where are you guys going to be at this week?
Quentin, you want to start?
Yes. Well, Friday I'm going to be back out at the Bluff. I'll be checking out the Pace versus Flower Bluff game. And I saw last week as the temperatures dipped a little bit, especially out there near the water, it was difficult to keep my glasses from fogging up. So I'm hoping I'll have a little bit of a better chance on the sidelines this week. But, I got a chance to see Pace a little bit last year. Like I said, I know they're not going to come in, afraid of playing a 1 seed or a higher seed than them. So I think, it should be a competitive game. So I'm excited to see that.
Andrew, where are you going to be?
I will be in Edinburgh this weekend again. This is going to be the only bi-district playoff matchup between 2 Hidalgo County teams, so it was a must-see for me. This one's going to be the top-ranked team in our area, the Edinburgh Bayless SaberCats, hosting the Wesco High Panthers in the first round of the 6A-D1 playoffs. I'm really excited for this one. Both of these teams are coming off back-to-back trips to the 3rd round. Obviously, that's not going to happen for someone this time around. And these are 2 teams that shared a district for the past 2 years. And the road team has taken turns winning games in this series. So you can kind of throw out the record books for this one. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think our plans this week are to be at the Vets Nicky Rowe game. So I think that's where we'll be. Spud and I, we're like a couple of Siamese twins. You can't separate us. We won't go to different games, so we'll probably be at the same game. Guys, again, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate you guys taking the time out today. Before we go, I want to give a shout out to our guy, South Texas Blood Sport here, who graciously let me use his graphic today for the background. I thought it was fitting, being playoff season and everything, instead of going with our normal background. If you guys aren't giving him a follow on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, the guy does great work. Reach out to him. He's more than happy to make graphics for your team or for your playoffs. I mean, he does them all the time. Yeah, give him a shout. And thanks, Sergio. We appreciate it. Guys, again, thanks for taking the time out today, especially we were supposed to do this yesterday. But work, it's always work with us, man. Something pops up and we've got to take care of it. So thanks for bending over backwards and kind of humoring us and coming on with us today. Guys, I hope you guys like the information you got from these 2 today. It's a whole lot more than I could have or Spud could have given you. Different perspective. You guys hear what we think all the time. So it's always good to get different perspectives on the show and get a little breakdown. Guys, thanks for coming on again. We appreciate it. And maybe we'll be back on again next week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And maybe if we're lucky, we'll be back in a couple of weeks to break down some more Coastal Bend versus RGV playoff matchups.
Definitely. Quentin, Andrew, thanks again, man. We appreciate it.
It'll be fun. Thanks for the invite.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye-bye.